The last few months in our house seemed to dissolve into a permanent grayness. Not in drama, not in loud conflict, but in that special kind of silence where no one dares to speak aloud about what truly matters. Everything looked normal, and that was precisely what was terrifying. I am Evelyn Moore, 42 years old, living in a quiet suburb of Seattle, in a house that Daniel and I built almost 10 years ago. From the outside, it seemed perfect. A neat facade, a lawn where Liam once learned to ride a bike, and the light in the windows that, in the evening, should signify coziness. But inside, it was completely different, as if someone had paused all feelings, conversations, even glances. Daniel, he started leaving earlier and returning later. His suitcase was always half-packed. We didn't argue, didn't shout. We simply stopped touching each other, in every sense of the word. I cooked dinner he ate without lifting his eyes from his phone. Liam, our son, ate quickly and retreated to his room. And for the umpteenth evening, I found myself just sitting in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Nothing was happening, but this emptiness was slowly growing under my skin. This morning I woke up to the light streaming through the curtains as if nothing had happened. Daniel was already in the kitchen, dressed, with coffee, on autopilot. He nodded at me, I nodded back. We hugged out of inertia. Then he said, "I'll need to go away for a couple of days." "Portland." I just nodded again, didn't even ask why, didn't even think about it. When he left, I was alone with the house, with my thoughts, and this strange silence in which I suddenly began to hear myself. Inside there was a feeling not of anxiety, not of sadness, rather hunger, not physical, but some deep human desire to be noticed. Not as a mother, not as a housekeeper, as a woman, as a person. But even to myself, I was afraid to admit how important it was, how scary its absence was. I walked around the house, dust on the railings, chips on the stair steps, a wall by the window that had long needed refreshing. I should finally take care of this, I thought, as if this decision could change something. And suddenly a thought popped into my head. Liam. He was immersed in his projects, his studies, closed off like a safe. But maybe if I asked him to help with the repairs, it would not only be an opportunity to refresh the walls, but also a chance to get closer. Scary, silly. But I felt something stir inside me, hope. At noon, I knocked on his door. "Liam," I said, "I have an idea. Can you help me downstairs?" "Something with the car?" He raised an eyebrow. "No, the walls. I want to try to patch the stairwell. I'm just tired of looking at these cracks." He looked at me with that expression teenagers often have, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "All right, why not? I can finish my homework later." When he came out, I felt a strange excitement, as if we were both entering a new space where everything would happen differently. Without predefined roles, without a script, just him and me and the walls we would try to fix. Inside me, for the first time in a long time, a sound resonated, the sound of real life. Liam descended the stairs, almost rushing forward as teenagers do when they still struggle to control their energy. He was already in an old t-shirt and sweatpants, dressed casually but ready. In his hands, a phone. In his eyes, vigilance. "So what did you want to do?" he asked, hiding a yawn. "The stairwell, the wall by the window. It's been cracked for a long time, and honestly, I just don't want to wait for someone else to take care of it." He nodded, almost mechanically. I handed him a plastic bucket of putty and 2 spatulas, one wide, one narrow. "I'll show you how if you want. It's not difficult." He looked at me with a hint of skepticism, but said nothing. We both knew it wasn't about the walls. For the first 15 minutes, I talked more than I had in the past week. I explained how to hold the spatula at an angle, how to ensure there were no tails left on the layer. Liam silently nodded, sometimes asking for clarification. He did as I asked, carefully, diligently. But I could feel he was tense inside. It wasn't about the repair, it was the awkwardness that arises when you haven't talked genuinely for too long, when too much has built up in silence. I noticed how he stole glances at me, as if trying to understand. Why did I call him? What was behind it? "You're doing well," I said, especially for the first time. "Are you sure?" he smirked, looking at the wall. "I thought it would be worse." "This isn't really about the walls, is it?" I asked too quickly, Almost without thinking, he looked at me. For a long time, silently. At that moment, a cold current ran through my body. I had opened something he had carefully kept inside. And to my surprise, he didn't recoil. "You're often home alone, aren't you?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, not daring to look away. "And you're often alone upstairs." He shrugged. I don't know. Sometimes I want someone to come to me on their own. Not as mom, not as necessity, but just as a person. These words, as a person, struck right at the heart. I suddenly realized how long he and I had been close and yet so far apart. How often in our family each of us just lived their role, father, son, mother, instead of living for each other. The work progressed slowly, but not because of its complexity. It was just that each of us was afraid to move faster, as if we could break the fragile bridge that had just begun to form between us. "See this?" I pointed to a rough edge. "It's easy to fix. The main thing is not to try to make it perfect the first time." When the work was finished, Liam put away the tools without waiting to be asked. He even washed his hands without leaving any marks on the sink. I watched him, and something inside me softened, as if after a long winter, what I thought was long dead began to thaw. The living room was already dark, and only the lamp in the corner cast long shadows on the wall. I approached closer, examined the putty. Yes, it was rough in places. Yes, it could have been better, but there was effort, desire, and presence in it. "Thank you, Liam," I said softly. He shrugged, but then suddenly added, "I'm glad you called me. Not because of the wall, just it was the right thing to do." I nodded. A feeling spread through my chest that I had been afraid to lose forever. Closeness. Subtle. Almost invisible, but real. The next morning, I woke up early. Earlier than usual. The room was grayish and quiet. That hour when the house hasn't yet decided if it's awake or not. I went downstairs barefoot, feeling the floor slightly chill my feet. I made myself coffee and sat by the window. Below, under the stairs, the traces of yesterday's work were still visible on the wall. Whitish putty, rough strokes, some uneven spots here and there. But in this roughness there was something warm, human, and I suddenly caught myself thinking, this wall is closer to me now than my husband. Liam appeared in the kitchen half an hour later. He wasn't too lively or too withdrawn, just ordinary, the way children are when they don't have to pretend. "Good morning," he said, opening the fridge. "Morning," I replied, and offered him toast. He silently nodded, and we began to have breakfast in semi-silence. But this was no longer the silence that tormented. It was a calm pause in which each of us was comfortable. I watched him. How he brushed his hair away from his forehead. How he slightly squinted from the sunlight. How he crunched on the toasted bread and seemed like a child again. But not quite. And then I realized he was growing up, and I had perhaps long stopped noticing it. "Are you going to continue working today?" I asked. He nodded. "I want to try to smooth out the right corner, where it's a bit warped. I Googled how to do it better." I smiled. He had Googled how to smooth out a corner. This wasn't just about the wall. It was his way of saying he was involved, that he was there. "I can help you if you want," I offered. He shrugged. "Only if you want to yourself. I can manage." And that was important. He didn't need my help, but he allowed me to be there. By lunchtime, we were standing by the stairs again. I held the bucket, he held the spatula. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from concentration. He measured, looked at the light, searched for the right angle. I watched his hands, thin, strong, youthful, no longer childish. And suddenly I remembered how these same hands once held mine, clung to the hem of my dress, grabbed a spoon with apple puree, and something inside me tightened. I walked over to him and placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He just turned and looked at me. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Yes, I just thought, you've grown so much. And it's as if I only noticed it now." He was silent, but in this silence, there was no detachment. It was mutual. "Mom, can I ask you something?" he suddenly said. "Of course. Are you happy with Dad now?" The question came straight on, but it didn't hurt. It rather opened. I thought, Not about how to answer, but about the truth. I, I don't even know, I said honestly. Probably not. Why? Because we stopped being together. We just lived side by side, and I long thought that was normal. But now, I don't think so anymore. He nodded, not surprised. Apparently he had felt it before I did. And with you, I feel needed again. Real. A long pause arose between us, but it wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of understanding. When he finished his work, I looked at the walls for a long time. In some places, the surface was still rough. In some places, the spatula left lines that would be hard to hide, but I didn't want to fix it, because in these lines, there was life. Not perfect, he said, but better this time. Better is what matters, I replied. And you did it yourself. He smiled. And in that smile, there was more than just satisfaction with himself. There was trust. A silent acknowledgement. You are not a stranger to me. In the evening, as I was falling asleep, I thought, perhaps everything we call love begins with simple things, with a look at someone's uneven work, with the desire to be close, with questions that are hard to answer, but important to hear. And suddenly I realized this was no longer about saving the family. This was about returning to oneself, to the living, to where even in the crooked lines on the wall, light can remain. Outside, a light drizzle, typical of Seattle, had begun. The kind where you don't bother with an umbrella, but after an hour, you're still soaked to the bone. Inside, it was warm. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of roasted garlic, blooming in olive oil. I was chopping tomatoes while Liam stood by the stove, carefully stirring the pasta in the pot. This was his choice, to cook together. Not at my request, not out of politeness. He simply came up and said, "Let's make dinner together. I want to learn." We didn't talk much, but in every movement, there was a sense of certainty that we were a pair. A spoon handed over, just in time. The stove turned down without a word. Dishes laid out in silent agreement. I remembered how, in the early years of his life, we moved in sync like this. He held onto my finger, I supported his back, he babbled, and I guessed the meanings. Now he was silent, but the meanings were clearer than ever. When we sat down at the table, the light from the lamp over the dining area fell softly, casting a warmth and almost intimate softness on our faces. Such light doesn't show wrinkles. It shows the real. "Are you tired?" Liam suddenly asked. I was surprised. Sometimes, but not from chores, from loneliness. "And I'm tired of the silence," he said, "the kind that's not about sound but between people." I froze. His words hit the mark, right where it had been numb in me for so long. We were two people drowning in the same ocean but not seeing each other in the water. "I thought," he continued, "that if you don't call, it means you don't need me. And I thought," I said slowly, "that you just didn't want me to intrude into your world. You wouldn't have intruded. I was waiting." He looked away. "I just didn't know how to say it." Just like that, I was waiting. Dozens of expensive gifts, trips, conversations with teachers, medical checkups, cares, and all of it was nothing if you didn't say, "I need you." "And you," he hesitated, "do you want Dad and me to be like before?" I didn't answer right away. Inside me, two women were at odds. One who knew she needed to keep the family together for the sake of her son, and another who had begun to feel, breathe, and be alive again. "I don't know, Liam," I said. I pretended everything was fine for a long time, but inside, it was empty. I felt it. "And you?" I looked at him. He nodded. "I didn't want you to suffer. But you suffered anyway, just silently." These words took my breath away. My child wasn't just growing up, he was watching. And suffering beside me, not knowing how to help. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I thought I was protecting you, and I thought I shouldn't interfere. Were we both wrong?" I took his hand, no longer a child's, warm, strong. We sat like that, not rushing, as if time had decided to rest from us. Perhaps for the first time in a long time. After dinner, he didn't go to his room as usual. He just sat on the sofa with a book. I made myself tea and sat next to him. No TV, no phones, no news, just him, a book, and me nearby, presence. Simple but filled with meaning. I looked at him and suddenly thought, I hadn't lost myself. I had just forgotten how to return, and now I was returning. Slowly, like the sun through the clouds, like a soul into a body. The morning began with the smell of dust. You know, not the kind that makes you sneeze, but the kind that appears when a house changes. When someone touches long-forgotten surfaces, blows off old layers, revealing the truth beneath. Liam came to me again, without unnecessary words, in an old shirt tucked into sweatpants. His hair was tousled, his gaze focused. He wanted to finish what he had started. I thought if I finish the corner and smooth out the seams today, then we can sand it later, he said, taking the bucket of putty. You're taking this seriously, I smiled. I just want it to turn out okay. I felt a slight warmth from these words. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's with effort, with attention, with involvement. And that's what real care is. We worked in silence for almost an hour. I held the lamp so he could see where there were still shadows of unevenness. He applied, smoothed, stepped back, approached again. His movements became confident, firm, no longer afraid of making a mistake. Look, he said, if you do it like this, at an angle, the seam is almost invisible. Almost, I nodded, but you still see it, don't you? I looked at him. I see it, but I don't consider it a flaw. He paused, squinting slightly, as if he didn't believe I had said that. You see, Liam, I stepped closer. Life is built the same way. It seems even and then click, and the angle goes the wrong way. And that's okay. The main thing is not to mask it, but to accept it. He thought about it. And Dad, did he have an angle that went the wrong way? I sighed. Yes, and so did I. We just pretended everything was level for a long time. And it's exhausting. He nodded, not asking unnecessary questions. What I had said was enough for him. When he finished, I looked at the walls for a long time. Where there was a rough line yesterday, today there was a smooth surface. Where there were uneven spots, now almost smooth. And yet there were scars here and there. But now I saw in them traces of life, not mistakes. As if the house itself was saying, I too am trying to be better, not perfect, but real. I ran my fingers over the wall. It was slightly rough, warmer than before. This was not just a repair, it was healing. Mine, his, ours. You know, I said. I was afraid we were lost. Did you really think so? I thought I was lost, but it seems I had just been silent for too long. He wiped his hands with a towel and leaned against the doorframe. Sometimes I don't know where I am either, but when we do something together, it's easier. Me too, I said. That's probably what real is. Doing together. And making mistakes together too. We smiled at each other quietly, like adults. In the evening when I was alone in the room, I approached that very wall again. I ran my finger along the seam that we still hadn't sanded smooth with Liam. I didn't touch it. Let it stay. Let it remind. Of us. Of how something real grew from a crack. The silence now sounded different, not like a threat, but like a space for breathing. And I knew, in this silence, you could hear the heart. One night was especially quiet, not the kind of silence that rings with loneliness in your ears, but the kind in which you can breathe, when you're not afraid of not being heard, even if you're silent. The house slept. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rare rain softly tap against the glass. Somewhere in another room, Liam was packing his... Maybe it wasn't about the subject. Maybe it was about the fact that there was no longer a wall between us. I remembered everything. How we started, with an empty room and a cracked wall, with unsaid things, with a distance that had become a habit. And then, simple movements, a spatula, a step back, silence that took shape. We didn't talk about what was important, we built it with our hands. This wasn't a magical turn. No magic could have changed us in a couple of days. But in those days, something was born that I hadn't felt in a long time. A real connection without conditions. Late in the evening, Liam came into the kitchen as if checking to see if I was asleep. Mom, yes? I thought, you're alive again, aren't you? I looked at him, attentively. There was so much maturity in his face that I hadn't noticed before. Not because it wasn't there, but because I hadn't really looked. Yes, Liam, I'm alive. Me too, he replied. It's just, before it was like I was inside glass. And now I can breathe. He sat across from me. We sat in the semi-darkness, in the faint light of the lamp. and suddenly it became clear to me. He was no longer afraid of the silence, and neither was I. We had learned to listen, to ourselves, to each other, to the world. A couple of days later, Daniel returned from his business trip. He noticed the changes, in the house, in the walls, in us. He didn't ask directly, didn't demand explanations. He just looked longer than usual. And when Liam told him about the putty, Daniel smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time. I didn't know where this turn would lead the three of us. I didn't make any plans, but I knew for sure there was no longer any emptiness inside me. One morning, I approached the wall, the very one where it all began. I ran my finger along the edge, found a small bump that Liam and I hadn't sanded down. I didn't touch it, let it stay, let it remind of us, of how something real grew from a crack. The silence now sounded different, not as a threat, but as a space for breathing. And I knew, in this silence, the heart could be heard.